Man, he did a move, which is the all-time greatest move I've seen.
Magic and I were sitting there, and we were sitting right on the baseline. And when Dr. J left his feet, he didn't know what he was going to do.
When we cut him off baseline, he started walking in there. Got the ball in one hand. And we said, wait a minute, he's got to come down. There's no way he can stay in the air that long.
And he was just in the air.
It's 89-84. Sixers, and they get inside. Unbelievable. Julius serving.
Ray Jones with the ball. Finds Julius serving. Drives to the basket. Goes up and... Oh, an unbelievable shot. Lifted to the fan.
Watch this fantastic move by the doctor.
Julius in the air, palming with the right hand. Floating, reaching, and spinning it in. Incredible.
The doctor with his magic shot.
Cooper and I said, should we ask him to do it again? We've never seen anything like that before. It was crazy.
Doc just picked the ball up with one hand without even touching it with the other one and windmilled this ball. Like his arms stretched from over here all the way like a rubber band. The crowd went crazy.
I can't believe that.
Did it, but believe me, he did it.
Dr. J could do things in today's game guys cannot do.
Julius was like that bird coming in on the wing, swooping in.
We always looked at Dr. J as like an alien. Where'd this guy come from? You know, look at what he does out on the court. My God, you know, there was nobody like him.
Me and Darryl Dawkins over there.
He was the first guy I ever saw with air brakes. Air brakes. He was going to the basket straight, and all of a sudden he said, and started going sideways.
How did he do that?
I was like, you know, somewhat like a girl. Oh, Doc!
J, Julius Erving, when you come into the league, Doc's in your locker room. Did you approach him and say, hey, I'm Charles Barkley? Did he see you and say, welcome? How did that all work?
I've told this story 100 times and I never get...
I must not have been listening.
I told the brothers. Just the brothers. Ernie, the night before training camp, I was up all night. I was nervous, because it was my first training camp, obviously. But the number one thing I thought about the whole night was, how am I going to approach Dr. J? Do I call him Dr. J, Julius, Mr. Irving? I had cold sweats thinking about that. And so I'm sitting in the locker room. Because first of all, not only that, Moses, Bobby Jones, Andrew Toney, Maurice Cheeks, like the Sixers, this was their heyday. So I was up like, God, I'm going to see all these guys I've been watching on TV. I don't know what to do. And Doc was clearly at the forefront. And I'm sitting there, and finally I'm in the locker room, and I said, well, I don't know what to do. And Doc comes over and says, hey, young fella, I'm Doc. And I said, I'm Charles Barkley. Ernie, I can't explain how nervous I was. Because like I said, that's when the Sixers was in their heyday. And seeing Doc and Moses Maurice and Bobby and all those guys, but Doc was the guy. That's one thing I always, like, we'll all have this in common. When we're growing up as little kids, there's very few players, the kids, say, I'm Dr. J, I'm John Havlicek, I'm Magic Johnson, I'm Larry Bird. We all got somebody, like, you know, who we are. And man, Doc was the guy for most people, especially somewhere like me where we don't have NBA basketball in Alabama. But he made it so, that's the only thing I was nervous about.
Who would you start your franchise with? With Larry Bird, Magic, and Michael? Well, Dr. J is who you would start your league with. And he's the guy who could be an ambassador for the league. And he could be a spokesman. And his style of play was infectious. So he create all of those things that those three had. Dr. J was the first league ambassador.
Bro really set him apart, especially in his ABA days, coming in, merging into the NBA. But look, I grew up a Laker fan. And in '83, obviously, you know, when Philly played the Lakers, how many of us here, seriously, after that move, when he went baseline and he held it, and how many of us went outside and tried to do that? We didn't have the big hands, But we all tried to be like Dr. J. We all tried to sail. We all tried to jump from the free throw line. I think he originally won the first slam dunk competition.
Reg, you mentioned the fro. How about the shoes?
Yeah.
Isn't he the first guy who had his own shoe? Remember the Converse Dr. J?
Yeah. You're right, Steve.
I don't think anybody else up to that point had their own Chuck Taylor. Right.
Doc was the first brand.
Yeah.
I think when also to echo Charles, because Doc lives here in Atlanta and I'm still with him, being around him, you're still nervous around Doc. I still go up to him and I say, Doc, how you doing? And he said, I'm fine, Steve. He still has that fatherly figure over you. And like you said, Kenny, he's an ambassador of the league. I mean, Dr. J is something my dad talks about, my granddad talks about, I still talk about. I mean, I think he'll go one player like Michael, and those players will go through generations after generations.
How did he impact your development as a basketball player?
Well, I think it was just what you said, his style. I think the individuality of him on his teams is what made him, because you always knew Dr. J played on great teams and everything, but I knew Dr. J, who he was, whether it was with the Pisces or the fish to say Pittsburgh, and he had the same, afro on, or it was just, he was always professional, it seemed like. It seemed like, it was always his demeanor, but you knew that what he had inside of him, you wanted it, and maybe you had a little bit of your own in there, and if you ever got the chance to play, you were going to do your dunks your way, you were going to do your things your way. I mean, no one glided or even tried to have body movements like him, and so he taught me, you can be your own individual.
Doc was just so smooth. He was smooth above the rim and below the rim. He was just so cool doing it. I can remember one time at LSU, I missed class, and he was down there doing something for Converse, and Coach Brown brought him over. And when I woke up, it was a hand on my chest, and I thought it was a guy that if you miss class, you got to run laps. So I'm thinking, oh, man, I got to run these laps. And then when I looked up, it was Doc. He was like, how come you didn't go to class, big fella? And he was just so smooth. And, we became friends, and when I decided to leave early, after calling my parents, Doc was one of the first people who I called. He was just so smooth, he was just so nice, and he was very hospitable.
Julius Erving, and, he brought so much creativity to the game.
Here comes Julius Erving. You know what's next. Oh, what a shot by the Doctor!
The under the hand against the Lakers, where you're behind the basket. We all tried to do it once he did it.
What a play by Erving. That's a play that only Julius could make.
I guess I would have never had those visions if I hadn't have seen Dr. J in his time.
I definitely remember Julius Erving. I was at that stage, I guess, where I really got into basketball when he was sort of in his prime. Dr. J, to me, was the NBA, and I just remember him dunking on everybody.
Look out! Slam dunk! Oh, Doctor!
I remember a dunk he had on Michael Cooper. I think it may have been in the playoffs, where he sort of cuffed it and just sort of dunked through him, on him, whatever you want to call it.
It's going to be stolen, I think, by the Doctor. Yes, he's got it. Here he comes. Way rock the baby to sleep and slam dunk.
Dr. J was a beautiful basketball player to watch. Grace, style, fly through the air. He dominated games when he wanted to. Dominated. And he just said, okay, that's it. My show tonight, I'm going to affect the whole game. He just dominated with grace and style. Oh, man.
Julius Erving with an incredible shot.
Even looking back at it now, and I'm in the NBA and I'm playing, and I appreciate even more the stuff that he's done.
He played above the rim. He played around the rim, underneath. He did a lot of different things, and you have to give the credit to Dr. J.
And the Doctor, magnificent as usual.
T-Mac, when was the first time you saw Dr. dunk?
Jeez. Classic films. The one on the Lakers when he cuffed it. I mean, that's like the greatest of all time. Favorite dunk.
Stolen, I think, by the Doctor. Yes, he's got it. Here he comes. Way rock the baby to sleep and slam dunk.
The Cooper dunk.
Yes.
When I grew up in New York City, and the Doctor was playing with the Nets. And so Larry Keenan, Super John Williamson, those were the guys I always watched early on. And Doc had the big fro. And we used to always have jokes that Doc could go, he was able to dunk on people so much because he had the big fro. And he put the ball behind his head, and then he'd move his hands, and then he'd pull it back out of his head and he'd dunk it. So it was just like, but his illusion and I think, and his dunk was great. But I think the way all of us have probably admired more the way he carried himself off the court, because he had a demeanor. It was the first time we saw what a superstar sports figure in basketball was. I think we've seen it like in music, we've seen it in other characters, but nobody had seen what a superstar basketball player was until we saw Dr. J.
I would venture to say Doc, because every kid growing up in my era wanted to be Dr. J. He kind of set the stage for what guys do today, like myself, because there's a lot of dunks that he did that players today still can't do. And the way he did it, you know, I never seen nobody go around the backboard on the other side, come back and finish and dunk it in traffic. I mean, look at the dunk against Bill Walton. You know, Bill Walton was one of the great shot blockers. I mean, he had no chance of blocking Doc's shot. So I would say he's the best of all time.